We went to Germany. I went late '54. She didn't come until April '55. My unit moved together, deployed to Germany, went by troop train from Fort Sill to Camp Kilmer, New Jersey, and then ship. There was no housing available at the time, so we had to wait for housing to be available. She came over in April 1955. By 1956, we realized she was pregnant, and first child, Carl, was born November of '56 in Würzburg at the Army Hospital there. We had 3 years in Germany, well, about 2.5 for her. 3 years in Germany. Stayed in the same town the whole time. Had a lot of interesting trips.
What was your job there?
I was with it was an Honest John rocket battery, long since obsolete. But at that time, we went to Germany as the latest weapon system in the Army that delivered nuclear weapons. And we were the new nuclear weapon delivery unit for Europe, U.S. Army Europe. And we were located in Kitzingen am Main, Kitzingen on the Main River, about 12 miles southeast of Würzburg, northern Bavaria. We lived well. We moved into brand new quarters. They were apartment buildings, brand new. Everything in it was new. The crystal, china, silver, everything brand new. We had a great time. We spent the whole tour in the same location. I did go off to 6-week schooling over Ammergau in the winter one time. Went away a lot to training, and of course the wives would stay back, do things among themselves at those times. But did a lot of traveling as well. Had a great time in Germany. Came back in 1957 to Fort Sill, back to Fort Sill again. I went through the battery officer course, and then was reassigned to Fort Sill to another unit there, and stayed in a couple of units there. And the unit I went to initially was preparing to go to Germany, so when they got serious about going to Germany, I left them to go to another unit. And then 1959, I went to the Artillery Officer Advanced Course, which is a career, they now call it the career course, for a year. And when I finished that course in 1960, I went to the Army Language School in Monterey, California. We got there, we discovered our second child was on the way, and that was great. And he was born in April 1961 at the Fort Ord Army Hospital. So they're about...
What was the intention of your going to the Army Language School?
Well, at the time I went through the advanced course, General Maxwell Taylor was Chief Staff of the Army, and his policy was he wanted all young officers, like captains, I was then, to strive toward a master's degree or a language. And either took about the same amount of schooling. I frankly didn't see any master's field I was interested in or even qualified for in the Army. And so I chose a language. I applied for language school, not knowing which I'd get. It turned out I got Persian. So I studied Persian for a year and then went to Iran. But motivation was...
But did you know that you were going to go to Iran? Or did you know that it was part
Well, yeah, looking ahead, since I'd had an accompanied tour, what we called a long tour, 3-year tour with family, I knew the next tour would be what we called a short, unaccompanied 12-month tour without. Back in those days, and we're talking 45 years ago, they alternated. You'd go overseas 3 years, come back for 3 to 5 years, and then go overseas maybe for a 1-year tour, back, and alternate back and forth. So I knew that I was going to be having an unaccompanied short tour, that unaccompanied meaning without the family. And so thus when I went to language school, I definitely wanted to go to Iran to put to practice the language I'd learned, and that was the case, of course. I spent a year in Monterey totally immersed in that language, learning to read, write, and speak, and then went to Iran to be a military advisor for a year and lived way out in the country. Had some great experiences, and greatest of all being able to do things independently because I spoke the language, could read and write and speak the language. So I got a lot of interesting jobs. I was a field artillery advisor. I was a captain, but I, along the way, got some interesting little jobs to do because of my language capability, which made it even more interesting because I was there for a year without the family. And in those days, I didn't talk to my family for a year. There was no way to talk on the telephone. The only communication was letter, which took about 8 to 10 days by airmail. It probably went by camel from where I lived to Tehran. I'm joking, but it went slow mail on the U.S. Army side to Tehran and then airmail. And the jets were just coming out. When I went to Iran in January 1963, 62, the jets had just started flying. I went by a military jet. which was the Air Force version of the 707, and it was a tanker. They converted to passenger. First jet ride, January 1962, when I went to Iran. And I went to Frankfurt, spent about a week there, and then flew Pan Am from there on to Tehran. Spent my first 6 months in Shiraz. Midway through my tour, they reorganized the army, and I was moved to Kermanshah in western Iran. I had a lot of great experiences, including a very severe earthquake in September of 1962, where I was sent out to be liaison with an army hospital that flew in Germany. Could tell some stories about that, but that would take another tape probably to do, but very exciting times. Of course, Carl was born in Germany, and he was our child until Craig came on. And Carl was 4 and a half when Craig was born. And then, right after Craig was born, I went to Iran. So I went to Iran. Craig was 9 months old. When I came back, he was 21 months old, and he didn't know who I was. Mariana kept sending me pictures of him, but he didn't have the slightest idea who this guy was, so they coming back into our household. And then we went right from there to Albuquerque, to Sandia Base, where I had to, it took a little bit of adjusting to adjust back in, live away from my family for a year, and then come back and start living with them again. It's a little bit of an adjustment coming from the environment I'd been in. But we got to Sandia Base. We tried to get the boys involved in activities. I know Carl was in, we did things together. We camped out together. We played together, and then we got Carl involved in, I think, a little league or something like that. And Craig was still a bit young at that time. And we went from there to Fort Leavenworth. Craig's still a little bit young, 4 years old when we went to Fort Leavenworth. But Carl was, by then, had started playing an instrument in the band and was involved in they didn't call it Little League, it was T-ball or something like that at the time. And then as we moved on to Northern Virginia and Falls Church in 1966, Craig by then was 5, going on 6, and started getting involved in some of those activities too. But then before he knew it, I was headed back overseas again. We came back to Washington for a few years, and I went to Vietnam. So I had several periods where I was gone for a whole year with no contact with the family. And I put a burden on the mother, of course, because she had to be father and mother both. In Vietnam, I commanded a 105 millimeter howitzer battalion. Very exciting time. Spent a great deal of my time in the helicopter, had a lot of close calls. Shot at a lot, crashed one time, near mid-air collision another time. Didn't write home about that stuff, but anyway, a lot of excitement.
Were you ever scared?
You're right, absolutely. Initially, the first time was under a rocket attack. I was scared. I won't deny. But over time, it became so routine, and you've got the job to do. You don't think that much more. By the end of my tour, I was probably getting reckless because I'd just become immune to it. I never did like going out at night, and particularly at night, you could see the tracers when they were shooting at you. I didn't like that particularly, but shot at a lot. Had one crash, walked away from another almost mid-air collision, and the helicopter was ruined in the process of diving and missing the plane that was about to hit us. Yeah, you get scared, but I have to say, the thing you have to be careful about is that after the initial scaredness, if you want to call it that, wears out, it becomes pretty routine, and that's not good either, I guess. But anyway, I had a great time, great experience. It was very career-enhancing, and no question that contributed to my going to War College pretty soon and my fast promotion to colonel, because I had a great experience, great job, did a great report and all that. We won the war where we were. And today, unfortunately, the history of Vietnam is not told the way it happened. The U.S. troops, combat forces, had all left there by 1973 at the latest. What we had left there at the U.S. Embassy fell in 75, but we left the country, we, the United States, left the country. I left there, of course, in March of 1970, but as far as we were concerned, in the area that we were in, we had won the war. Clear and simple. It was happening all over the country, but also the U.S. Well, the enemy was beat down. They were slowly getting beat down to where they were just much less and less of a threat. And the Vietnamese army was taking over and had the country pacified and under control. And we just were killing all the enemy, getting rid of them. and they weren't coming in the hordes they had come in before from North Vietnam. But the story's not told that way today. It's told about how we lost the war. That infuriates me when they talk about us losing the war, because we turned it over to the Vietnamese by 1973. We did keep a staff in the embassy, and that's all they want to show today is leaving the embassy in April 75. But the war was, we pulled all the troops out and turned over the Vietnamese, what they call the Vietnamization program. And we'd had enough. Our country had been involved in there for many years, enough. We said, okay, it's time for the Vietnamese to take over for themselves, and they couldn't handle it. So after all the U.S. forces left, then the North Vietnamese came in and overwhelmed them. And that was that. We'd all gone. I had been gone several years. I can't emphasize enough. The U.S. combat forces had been gone for 2 years when the country collapsed. But anyway, I felt like when I came back in Vietnam, I felt I had really done a great job. We all had done a great job. We accomplished our mission. We had a lot to be proud of. And to this day, it makes my blood boil to see the way they tried to depict that war, because we did a good job. We did help these people. It's just that they didn't have the will, and the U.S. didn't have the will to hang in there and stay with them. And so they collapsed when the North Vietnamese overwhelmed. Had several rocket attacks. It's very common for them to shoot rockets, these big rockets, at our facilities. But we knew to run to bunkers and that sort of thing. But the first one I ever saw, when I first went to Vietnam, rocket attack a few nights after I got there. Of course, I ran the bunker, and lo and behold, I found that some people around me had been killed. And that, being new in the country, that got my attention. That woke me up real quick. This is real, you know. I spent the first part of my tour in the headquarters in Long Binh, U.S. Army Vietnam headquarters. When I moved to the battalion, I felt a lot more secure. When I was out with the combat forces, I felt much more comfortable than being back in that headquarters, which was very vulnerable, and where they loved to shoot rockets in any time of day or night. We flew into Bien Hoa, which was just near Saigon, and they flew troops into several parts of the country, one up north, one down south where I was. And because of the threat of the enemy shooting at the airline, these were generally contract airlines. They were they were generally 707s. In those days, those were the biggest airplanes, 707 DC-8s. They flew in and made a real fast landing. They flew in to a point, they went nose down real fast to avoid being shot at, landed, and they had this thing all planned out. They had a plane load of people waiting to get on that plane. We landed, we stopped, I went over in March and flew from Travis Air Force Base in California, and with a refueling stop in Japan where it was very cold. And then we arrived at Bien Hoa near Saigon, and man, it was hot. They opened the door of that airplane, and it was just like opening a steam bath or something, extremely hot. And here was this plane load of guys under this shed waiting. We got off, they ran on, the plane left. It was that fast, just like that, bang. They had the arriving people go a certain way for processing, and the departing people were ready, poised to get on that plane. And as soon as we emptied out, they were gone. And they were hooping and hollering, carrying on. Well, a year later, I understood what they were doing. But anyway, so then they take off, and they take off real steep, get up real fast before they could be shot at. Well, a year later, when I left, same thing. I happened to be the senior officer. I was lieutenant colonel. I was a senior officer on my airplane, so I was a troop commander for whatever that was worth. But we were all in this, under this this metal roofed shed, waiting. We've been processed, ready to go. The plane landed. Here came these guys in, and then on the plane it go. I'm gonna never forget. We took off. Boy, you should have heard the hooping and hollering and carrying on. We got up in the air and left. So glad to be heading home. Quite a year, but nice to go home too. That's a long time ago too. Yeah. We lived in Falls Church. Family stayed there when I went to Vietnam. I was there for a year. Commanded 105 Howitzer Battalion in the 3rd Brigade, 9th Infantry Division. Came back, that was an exciting time too, of course. I came back for a very brief tour in the Pentagon, and obviously the Assistant Vice Chief of Staff, and I was selected for the War College. So we moved to Newport, Rhode Island in the summer of 1971. And that was a great experience because I think by then even Craig obviously was old enough to appreciate the beautiful area and the things to do. And then lo and behold, while we were there, we discovered that Marion was pregnant. What a shock. The boys were 15 and 11, and here came a baby. So anyway, Craig and Carl had a little sister, and born in Newport. And Carl was in high school, Craig was in elementary school, and well, that was exciting. It was hard to believe because your mother, well, Marion was 40, 41. In fact, she was just turning, Karen was born in 1972, she was just turning 42. And she got a lot of attention from the doctors because they weren't used to, at the Naval Hospital in Newport, they weren't used to seeing an expectant mother that age. Big surprise. I guess a large way of doing things, but big surprise. But, you know, what can you do but take it in stride? But a great joy, obviously, you know, as you know, being the middle child, you know how much you enjoyed having a little sister. But anyway, you're not supposed to be, I'm not supposed to be talking to you, am I? Anyway, it was quite an experience because we had always hoped for a third child and never had one. And we just figured that's the way it was going to be. And then to come along and be a girl, it was a different experience. Of course, we were both older as she was growing up. We were much older than her friends' parents. That's the way it was. But turned out to be great. I guess Carl and Craig both remember a lot about Newport. Karen, unfortunately, doesn't remember a thing about it. And then we came back to, we had sold our house at Falls Church and we left to go to Newport, not realizing a year later we'd come right back again. So we bought a new house outside of Vienna and moved there in the summer of '72. And lo and behold, while we were at the War College at Newport, I was selected for colonel a little earlier than I expected. So I was actually selected ahead of my contemporaries. So it sped up promotions, and right away, as I was being promoted to colonel, the Army had come up with a new selection system for command. I was picked right off the bat for a command. So we were only there about a year in our new home and went to Greece, which is another story. And I know Carl graduated from high school in Greece. Craig can remember that one, I'm sure. And Karen, unfortunately, doesn't remember that either because she was too young. But we spent a year and a half in Greece and then back more of the Pentagon. And then by that time, Craig was in junior high, getting ready to go to high school himself because he started high school, I guess, 1975. We came back in January 75, and I guess started high school in August 75. Carl graduated from high school in Athens, and he went off to A&M for a year and then back to George Mason in Fairfax. Well, I think, of course, having grown up in a Christian home, going to church, going to Sunday school, church camp, just sort of the run-of-the-mill mainline Protestant Presbyterian through college, in the Army, nothing special. In the Army, we went to military chapels, particularly in Germany. Any denomination had Army chapels. Went to Army chapel there. Actually, Marion came very close to losing Carl when she had to spend 6 weeks in bed in the hospital when they thought she was going to have a miscarriage. So that was a time of a lot of prayer at our church, our chapel, military chapel and all. And she had to stay in bed 6 weeks during that period till everything was okay. Anyway, that was a little bit of, I guess, spiritual, whatever. We came back and continued to go to a lot of churches. I taught Sunday school. It was only by the, I guess in Vietnam, quite frankly, I rarely went to church because Sunday was another day, out there to stay alive sort of thing and do your job. Rarely went to church, maybe on a memorial service but chaplains would move around and see them, but you didn't have formal, if you're in a combat unit, you just didn't have the formal service like we do today. Well, we came back and we were back at Falls Church Presbyterian. I think I guess the real awakening I had is we were Falls Church, Presbyterian. One of the Lenten series, probably mid-70s, actually after we came back from Greece, because we went to military chapel there too. The mid-70s was the time really we started becoming aware of the Holy Spirit. There was a renewal in that period. And Mary and I went to a conference at Montreat, North Carolina, with our director of Christian education, Ann Dimmock, and her husband. And it was actually run by what they call the Presbyterian Charismatic Communion. And boy, some ministers were scared to death of that word, charismatic. Ooh, my, don't dare mention that to our minister. They were scared of what that might mean. Anyway, I found it a revelation to go to this renewal conference and see all the things they were talking about and doing. And it was spiritually really reinvigorating. Combination of the Lenten series class on the Holy Spirit. We never talked about the Holy Spirit and that sort of thing. We had about a 5 or 6 week Lenten series on that, you know, once a week class, and then going to Montreat at that conference. That was a real eye-opener. And I think from then on, it all began to mean a lot more to me because of the so-called renewal element, effort during that period. And I got more involved in church still, and from that day forward, well, I was a deacon when I went to Vietnam, then I became an elder and ordained an elder in 1972, and stayed involved in the leadership of the church from then on. But, you know, in mainline Presbyterianism, you find everything from real liberals to real conservative and everything in between. Well, we lived in Greece, and we got to visit a lot of places where Paul had traveled. That was certainly interesting. I don't know if it's necessarily that inspirational, but it made me really think about Paul's letters, to travel a lot in the areas that Paul had been, Philippi, Thessaloniki, Corinth, and those places. Had a lot of meaning for me. In fact, when I used to travel, I spent a lot of time traveling in Greece. I would read the acts about his travels through there, because I was right there at those places he'd been and where he's referring. I went through the ruins. Pardon me?
You've been to the Holy Land.
Oh yeah, that's right. When I came back from Iran, I had a tour of the Holy Land, way back when most of it was in Jordan. January 63, before the 67 war, when the borders changed. And then it had been there more recently, a few years ago. That was helpful too. But I think it was a slow evolution. And then you reach a point in life where you start losing family to death. That makes you stop and think again about eternity and heaven and God and Holy Spirit and all that stuff, you know. My dad died, and then when Marion died, and then my mother died. You know, those things bring you closer to that as well. And I would say when Marion died, probably the strongest thing for my children and me was our faith. You know, that was a great help. Thank goodness we had it, because some people don't. I don't know what to do without it. I think probably somewhere along the way, and I can't remember, I'm sure many people today would not agree with this about me, but there was a point in there, and I can't say when, probably that same period of the 70s, mid to late 70s, with the renewal of the Holy Spirit movement. I think one of the best things that happened to me was to learn more humility. Because when I was a hot shot in the Army, up and coming, Marion used to say, "I pray you never make general. I pray you don't make it." It was difficult as it was, and that would have made it more difficult. And I guess she thought I was too big for my britches or something. Anyway, but nevertheless, that's an expression. I mean, you think you're pretty big stuff. But anyway, I think there was a point in there tied in with this renewal movement and all, that I suddenly realized how to be more humble. I think that was a life-changing experience. Humble, cleaning up my language. I never had any problem with drinking or that kind of stuff, but being out with soldiers, I had to talk to them a certain way to get their attention. And I had a point there, I just stopped that. I just don't talk that way. That's no big life-changing thing, but it's a whole thing wrapped up in trying to lead a more Christian life. But I'd say humility something I learned because I was so successful and I was doing such great things. I think I just figured, and I got to thinking I was too important. I guess it was just a combination of that really began to feel the Holy Spirit in me and guiding me and realizing there are more important things in life, and particularly about that point where I realized I wasn't going to be a general. What a relief, in a sense. Different value system. There are more important things than just advancement, sort of thing. I began to see that. And I think I was my most effective in my later years in the Army when I stopped all this rat race of trying to get ahead at any cost. And so I don't say I ever did that, but the point is, it was a big rat race, and I just finally withdrew from it and felt a lot better about it all. When I retired, of course, a full colonel must retire at 30 years. I didn't know what I wanted to do. And so I was trying to decide. I did not want to go to work for the government because in those days, a retired regular officer had to forfeit a sizable amount of his retired pay, and I didn't want to do that. I had been interested in travel, and I suddenly got the notion after reading a few articles and books that maybe I'd like to go in the travel business. So I went to a course about that, and that's what I did. Sort of tinkered around with that and spent some years with health, doing a lot of traveling and, in a sense, managing their company for them. And then, still retired early. I retired in 1987. That's been a while. And in fact, I was 56 when I retired. And ever since then, it's been volunteer work and church, Rotary, stuff like that for now going on 18 years. Well, I guess I'd have to say my family, my children, and grandchildren. I mean, why not? What? I can't be proud of my financial assets or my property or my material things. I guess proud of the fact that I led a pretty clean life. I didn't really lie, steal, and cheat, and I kept my integrity throughout my Army career, and the fact that my children grew up to be upstanding citizens. That's pretty important to me. And I stayed very involved in the church, and nothing to be ashamed of. I have nothing to be ashamed of at all, and I know of. Well, just the fact that I survived, for one thing. But then to have gotten my promotions ahead of my contemporaries to major, lieutenant colonel, I was promoted way ahead of my contemporaries. I got to go to the War College. A very small percentage of officers go to the War College. I was able to do that. And so I had a very successful career as far as the right kind of jobs and the right places and the interesting jobs. I haven't even talked about my later years when I was with the Joint Chiefs of Staff and spent so much time in Geneva. But a lot of satisfying jobs. I have nothing to regret, quite honestly. As far as my career goes, I didn't make general, and probably the best thing that ever happened to me. Your mother, Marion's prayers were answered. Okay, well, obviously, Marion's death was not expected. We knew she had the heart problem. She had the surgery the first time, which we thought would be the cure-all. It wasn't. Had to go back for the second surgery, yet, quite honestly, we didn't think there was any big problem because the doctors were highly confident they would fix the problem. So obviously that day when they came out of the operating room and said there's no hope, that was a terrible shock to all of us. And then the shock of course, being alone. It's hard to explain when you've been married 40 some odd years and suddenly you're alone. And of course Karen was just getting ready to get married and she had her own depression problems at that point. But anyway, I knew that I had to keep going. It was not easy, of course, and I don't wish that experience on anyone. But after Marion died, I was contacted by a representative of the Widowed Persons Service, which is an organization for newly widowed people. For a few months, I wasn't interested. And then after a few months, I began to think, well, maybe I ought to contact them. So I called them back, started going, met with one of the representatives. We met monthly for the Vienna Oakland group, met monthly, and then also the whole Northern Virginia group would get together monthly for a speaker or something. I met Janice through that and started a lot of the activities, and over time began to find, she was, I enjoyed talking with her, and we had a lot of shared interests. She lived across town from me. I'd never known her, although, interesting enough, years later, after we were married, Karen was preparing to have her first child, Natalie, and Janice hosted provided the house for a baby shower. And Karen came to the baby shower and had this piece of paper, and it was her report card from preschool, and Janice had been her teacher. Small world. And fortunately, she got good grades and everything. But about 4 or 5 years old, I guess it was, maybe 4, Janice had been Karen's preschool teacher way back then. And she vaguely remembered Karen. Although when she saw the pictures of her, I'll let her explain this part of it. She wasn't sure if she remembered or not. But anyway, it turned out she had been Karen's preschool teacher. Anyway, we were married, as I said, almost 9 years ago. When is it, May? We were married in August of 1995. Believe it or not, almost 9 years. Time flies.
August 96.
I'm sorry, 96. Yeah, 9 years, of course.
Say again, we were married.
We were married in August 1996. August 3rd, 1996. Almost 9 years ago. Just about 9 years ago. Pretty close. Time does fly. We've had great times together. I don't know what I'd done without her, or what I'd do without her today. She's very important to me, and I hope to my family as well, because she's been a godsend for me, I'll tell you that. My hope for my family is that they have long, healthy, happy lives, productive, and stay healthy and happy, and live a long time, And we've been very fortunate. We've had no tragedies, we've had no sadness, and I trust everyone will take care of themselves, and the grandchildren will marry and live happily there ever after, But my hope is everyone will stay healthy, happy, live, as they marry, have a very happy married life, and lead a healthy, productive, long life. Christian-centered, Christ-centered. Continue to go to church, be to a Christ-centered church, Bible-centered church. Excuse me, I think that would be very good to have some religion, because this day and age, we seem to be in the minority. To live an upstanding, upright life, to tell the truth, don't lie, cheat, or steal, but be honorable. Be careful about your integrity and your name and your word. You can't buy those, and you can't sell them, you can't buy them. It's up to you to lead that kind of a clean, upright, respectful life, and have the strength to resist temptations, whether it be in your work, wherever you are, temptations on deviating from honest ways of doing things, but do the honest thing. That's about it. In summer 1979, I was completing my tour with the Joint Chiefs of Staff, going to my final, called terminal assignment in the Army. 4 colonels must retire at the end of 30 years, and I had 3 years to go, or a little less than 3 actually, and a little less than 4, sorry, and was anticipating going to an assignment in the Defense Intelligence Agency, and received the Shah had left Iran, Khomeini had taken over, and I was seeing these horrible scenes on television of what had been happening in Iran. And I received a call from the chief of colonel assignments in the Army saying I had been selected to go to Iran. Because of the turmoil, not knowing what the future held, they had withdrawn the two-star general from there and wanted to keep a colonel there to keep a presence for the advisory effort. And they had decided I was the colonel because they felt I was the most qualified. I was, in fact, I was about the senior colonel in the Army. As a matter of fact, when I retired, to the best of my knowledge, I was a senior colonel in the Army. Anyway, they called, said, look, we've looked over, no question you're the best qualified. You know, you've been in Iran, you speak the language, you read the language, you write, you've had all these assignments, all these experiences, you're the guy. I said, hey, no way. You know, I see what I see on television. They're terrible the way they're carrying on. I could not go work with those people because of what at least I see on the news. I said, besides that, I was associated with the Shah. He was in power when I lived there. And I said, and on top of that, my family had enough turmoil when we lived in Greece with a coup and an overthrow of the government and all the other things that went with that revolution. They said, well, first of all, don't worry about your family because they're not going to go with you anyway. Yeah, great. Well, then he said, and don't worry about the Shah. I mean, they won't remember that you were associated with the Shah. You bet they wouldn't remember over in Iran. Anyway, we talked about it, and I said, look, I just can't do this. Well, they came back a day or two later, and we talked about it further. And I said, finally, recognizing that the Army's policy was, and probably still is, that when an officer is alerted for an overseas assignment, if he declines, he's immediately required to put in his retirement papers. I wasn't ready to retire. I had about 3.5 years before I had to retire, not knowing what I wanted to do, essentially happy with what I was doing. I didn't want to retire, but I was faced with this thing. I said, look, I told the chief of colonel assignment, I said, it's a matter of conscience. I cannot go work with Khomeini and those people based on the way I see they're acting on television and the way they're massacring and killing and assassinating people all over the place. Well, they said, okay, we'll think about it. Well, they called back the next day and they said, okay, since it's a matter of conscience and principle, we will not force you to go. And that was that. But the next guy, they gave 2 weeks notice and he went. They called the next guy on the list. He was a colonel in Atlanta. And he was given 2 weeks preparation. He went, and while he was there, he became a hostage for the duration, 444 days. And I saw an article by him in, I think it was Time magazine, where during his time being held there, one day they took him into a courtyard and tied him up to a post and lined up a firing squad and had a mock execution. They fired blanks at him. But that's the kind of stuff he had to go through. I felt sorry for him, but I didn't want to go either, you know. But anyway, that's close, talk about close calls. I had close calls that way as well as helicopter crashes and near crashes and getting shot at and a lot of other stuff as well. Another example of a close call. But I just, as a matter of conscience and principle, could not go work with those kind of people. Just like today, who'd want to go work with Al-Qaeda or somebody like that? It's the same sort of thing. We didn't know at that time that's how bad they were. Turned out they were very bad.
You saw it also, perhaps. I think that's it.
Oh man, I got to get another drink. I'm burning up. Let's see now, how do I get this thing out of here?